So let's talk about a day that completely changed the game. January 3rd, 2026. That's the day the United States launched a direct military attack on Venezuela. And we're not talking about a warning shot or some kind of covert op. This was an event that literally redrew the political map of the Western Hemisphere. Today, we're going to break down exactly how it happened and what it all means.
Yeah, just to be crystal clear here, this wasn't a proxy conflict. It wasn't some shadowy covert action. On that day, the U.S. carried out a direct, out in the open military strike against a sovereign nation. And as you can imagine, that sent absolute shockwaves across the globe. And the operation itself? It was incredibly swift and, well, decisive. You had explosions rocking the capital, Caracas, and then, in this absolutely stunning turn of events, the sitting head of state, President Nicolás Maduro, was captured. Right away, that raises two huge questions. How on earth did we get to this point, and why did it happen now?
Okay, so how did things get to this point? I mean, an attack like this, it just doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It was really the final explosive chapter in years and years of hostility and escalating pressure between these two nations. For years, the whole relationship was caught in this toxic cycle of accusation and rejection. The U.S. government was constantly accusing the Venezuelan leadership of, well, a whole laundry list of things: narco-terrorism, massive corruption, you name it. Venezuela, for its part, just shot all of that down. They said it was all a smokescreen, just a flimsy excuse for the U.S. to force regime change and get its hands on the country's huge oil reserves. On top of all that, you had years of crippling economic sanctions that pretty much cut Venezuela off from the world.
But what's really striking is just how fast the dominoes fell at the end. In late 2025, you start to see the U.S. military really beefing up its presence in the Caribbean. Then, a huge move. U.S. forces actually seize Venezuelan oil tankers. The rhetoric from both sides just explodes, and in those last few tense days, diplomacy just completely collapses. The path to conflict was pretty much set in stone. So, with diplomacy completely off the table, the stage was set for January 3rd. Let's really break down the chronology of the attack itself. Okay, so the operation kicked off in the early morning hours with a whole series of coordinated strikes, and these weren't random at all. The targets were super strategic: key military bases, air defense systems, and all the command and control centers. The whole idea was to completely neutralize Venezuela's ability to fight back. It was a classic multi-domain attack. You've got air power, naval support, electronic warfare, all working together to just overwhelm the opposition. And it all led to the main goal: capturing President Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. And that right there? That was the endgame. By removing the head of state and taking him into U.S. custody, the operation basically decapitated the entire Venezuelan command structure in one single decisive blow. Of course, any military action has a human cost. Now, while both sides admit there were casualties, the actual numbers are still heavily disputed. The Venezuelan government reported deaths among both military and civilians, while U.S. sources have cited lower figures. What isn't in dispute, though, is the massive disruption to the country's infrastructure. We're talking widespread power outages and communication blackouts across multiple regions. The military part of this might have been quick, but the political fallout, that was just getting started. So let's look at how the rest of the world reacted, because believe me, the response was anything but unified. Right away, you had two completely opposing stories emerge, and there was no middle ground. The U.S. government framed the attack not as an act of war, but as a lawful, necessary national security operation. Their goal, they said, was to remove a criminal leadership structure. Venezuela, as you'd expect, saw it very, very differently. To them, it was a blatant, illegal act of aggression, pure imperialism, and a total violation of their sovereignty. This quote from the U.S. administration is really telling. Check out the specific language here: removal of a criminal leadership structure and facilitation of a political transition. That wording was chosen very, very carefully. It was all about positioning the action as a law enforcement or national security issue, not a traditional act of war. And on the flip side, here's the direct counter-narrative. Venezuela's official statement used the language of international law. They called it an illegal act of aggression. This immediately set the stage for a massive debate on the world stage about, what sovereignty even means anymore and what the rules of engagement really are. And that division played out everywhere. The world was split. You had some governments siding with Venezuela, condemning the attack as a violation of international law. You had others that stayed silent or maybe offered some quiet support behind the scenes. The UN Security Council, totally paralyzed, couldn't take any action.
And meanwhile, neighboring countries in Latin America were just watching with deep concern, worried about the chaos it could unleash in their own backyard.
But this firestorm wasn't just international. Back home in the United States, the attack ignited a fierce political and legal debate. Lawmakers were sharply divided. I mean, it brought up these huge fundamental questions about presidential authority. Did the president actually have the legal right to order this without getting Congress to sign off? Did it violate the War Powers Act? The debate was intense, and it really exposed a deep, fundamental split in the U.S. about the limits of presidential power. All right, so let's move beyond the headlines and the political shouting matches. What was the actual result on the ground? This final section is all about the new reality this created and the long-term ripple effects for everyone involved. For Venezuela, the immediate aftermath was just chaos. The country was thrown into a severe political and institutional crisis. With the central leadership just gone, power structures started to break apart. The economy, which was already on its knees, was disrupted even more. And the future of the country's leadership? Well, that became completely uncertain, which just fueled more instability and migration. But if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the long-term implications are just massive. This attack could actually redefine the rulebook for U.S. intervention in the 21st century. It opens the door to more instability across Latin America, and it could even invite other global powers to get more involved in the region. And for Venezuela itself, well, the consequences for its society and its very sovereignty are going to be felt for generations to come. So let's be really clear here. What happened on January 3rd, 2026, was not just another blip on the foreign policy radar. This was one of the most dramatic, significant military actions this part of the world had seen in decades. It was a major, major turning point. And that leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. The January 3rd attack created a powerful new precedent for direct military intervention. So the really sobering question now is simply this: when and where is that precedent going to be used again?